former British para Rick Rescorla, known to his men under the nickname Hardcore. The air mobility doctrine included large-scale use of helicopters for mobility, reconnaissance, and close air support.
Get them moving, back up. Second platoon, 3 o'clock, they're on the other hill.
Moore made the difficult decision to withdraw Alpha and Bravo, which means leaving the cut-off platoon to fend for itself. With the risk of annihilation looming, Hal Moore calls Broken Arrow, requesting all available air support because an American position is about to be overrun. On September 11th, 2001, aged 62, Rick arrived at his office in the World Trade Center, where he worked as head of security for Morgan Stanley when he saw a plane hit the North Tower in 1948. A young lieutenant serving in the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, volunteered to test experimental parachutes. During his initial test jump on November 17th, 1948, of which these are actual images, his parachute malfunctioned. Fortunately, he was able to deploy his reserve chute just in time. When he later reported to Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard, his superior, Kennard greeted him with, "Hello, Lucky." That nickname is one that Kennard would use again many years later as the division commander of the 1st Cavalry in the mid-1960s. The young lieutenant's name was Hal Moore. Hal Moore's journey began at just 17 years old when he entered West Point during the height of World War II. Enrolled in the Academy's accelerated wartime curriculum, he graduated in June 1945, weeks after the surrender of Nazi Germany and mere months before Japan's capitulation. After commissioning into the 82nd Airborne, Moore found himself surrounded by hardened veterans of World War II. In 1952, Moore's path led him to the Korean Peninsula, where he took command of a company in the 7th Infantry Division. The brutal conditions of Korea, the biting cold, the relentless mountains, and the savage positional battles tested him. It was here, amidst the chaos of close-quarters combat, that Moore honed his skills as a master tactician of light infantry operation. The air cavalry concept originated during the early 1960s as the US Army sought to modernize and adapt its forces for the challenges of unconventional warfare, particularly in Vietnam. The air mobility doctrine included large-scale use of helicopters for mobility, reconnaissance, and close air support. In 1964, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore was put in charge of the 1st Battalion 7th Cavalry Regiment, 1st to the 7th, part of the newly formed 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile. His senior enlisted advisor was a fellow former 82nd Airborne veteran, Command Sergeant Major Basil Plumley. More about him later. Despite its cavalry name, this regiment had a strong light infantry focus. Units trained to be inserted, supported, and extracted by helicopters, providing maximum flexibility in combat. Given the anticipated deployment to Vietnam, soldiers trained for jungle combat, focusing on ambushes, small unit tactics, and counterinsurgency. Troops practiced rapidly deploying into enemy-held areas. In August 1965, the 1st Air Cavalry Division arrived in Vietnam, tasked with testing a bold and unproven concept: air mobility in combat.
You take care of your men by making them ready to face whatever they have to face. You give them a weapon, make sure it's properly sighted in.
Their mission was simple yet audacious: use helicopters to dominate the rugged terrain of Vietnam. On November 10th, the 1st Battalion 7th Cavalry Regiment, led by Hal Moore, moved from their base camp at An Cay to a forward airstrip south of Pleiku. From there, they conducted search and destroy operations near the Plai Mae Special Forces camp, a remote outpost just 25 miles south of Pleiku and 20 miles from the Cambodian border. The soldiers quickly acclimatized to the unforgiving jungle terrain, encountering small-scale enemy contacts as they prepared for their next mission.
An air mobile assault to search and clear a area that we've had numerous red haze
We will have artillery, so we've got it when we need it. If and or when we get hit, all I want to hear is hitting back. Hit him back with 5 times as much as he hit you.
The battalion was to execute an air assault into the Yadrang Valley near Chupong Mountain on November 14th. The objective: conduct a search and destroy operation deep in enemy-held territory. Moore would lead 432 men from 4 companies, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie and Delta, into the operation. This was the 1st Battalion of 7th Cavalry, 1st of the 7th. Supporting them were 2 batteries of 105mm howitzers, 12 guns in total, that would be airlifted from Plymay to provide critical artillery support. Moore's command group included some of the best soldiers the army could offer. His right-hand man, Command Sergeant Major Basil Plumley, was a legend in his own right. A veteran of the 82nd Airborne Division, Plumley had seen combat in World War II, participating in the 82nd's historic airborne landings during Operation Overlord in Normandy and later Operation Market Garden. He'd go on to serve with distinction in Korea as part of the 187th Airborne Infantry. Plumley's military career was nothing short of extraordinary. By its end, he had earned 3 Purple Hearts, 4 Bronze Stars, 2 Silver Stars, and the very rare Triple Combat Infantryman's Badge, CRB, for service in 3 wars. For Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, having Plumley by his side was an asset of immeasurable value. Together, these seasoned leaders prepared to lead their battalion into one of the fiercest battles of the Vietnam War. On the morning of November 14th, 1965, the men of 1st Battalion 7th Cavalry would enter the Yadrang Valley. Near Chupong Mountain, 3 North Vietnamese Army NVA regiments, comprising of between 3,000 and 4,000 troops, were believed to be lying in wait. This enemy force wasn't an improvised militia. These weren't Viet Cong. These were PAVN, People's Army of Vietnam, or NVA, North Vietnamese Army. Professional soldiers supported by a vast logistical network known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This sprawling web of jungle paths and roads allowed North Vietnam to transport troops, weapons and supplies. The journey was brutal, fraught with disease, exhaustion and relentless American air raids. But these soldiers were determined and well prepared. Armed and equipped by allies like the Soviet Union and China, these troops carried high-quality small arms, machine guns and artillery. They weren't insurgents, but disciplined soldiers. Their plan? Lure the Americans into a decisive battle in the Yadrang Valley. This remote and rugged terrain, filled with dense jungle and rolling hills, offered the NVA a natural advantage. On the morning of November 14th, 1965, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore led an air reconnaissance mission that identified Landing Zone X-Ray, located near Chupong Mountain. It was deemed large enough to accommodate 8 to 10 Hueys at a time. The area appeared quiet, no signs of enemy activity. At 10:17 a.m., artillery batteries began firing into the surrounding jungle, clearing trees and high grass around the landing zone. Helicopter gunships followed, strafing the area with machine gun fire before moving to a holding pattern. Then the assault began. Flying low over the terrain, treetop level, the helicopter's gunners raked the underbrush with suppressive fire. As the soldiers disembarked, they moved quickly into the trees, ready for an ambush.
I'm down on corral. Everybody, move out. Get out there. Four 6, get that motor set up on the hill. I want fire in 1 minute. Get them moving, make up. 2nd platoon, 3 o'clock. They're on the other hill.
Hal Moore was among the first to land. A deliberate decision. As a commander, he wanted to be able to conduct a final aerial reconnaissance before landing. It would allow him command and control of the situation from the start. Although the landing proceeded without resistance, there was an eerie stillness in the air. The absence of immediate action put everyone on edge. As Moore would later remark, nothing was wrong except that nothing was wrong. The men of the 1st Battalion 7th Cavalry Regiment had entered the Yadrang Valley unopposed, but they were being watched. The NVA's trap was already in motion. By 11 a.m., 16 Hueys had delivered 90 men from Bravo Company and their equipment, and the helicopters began to fly back to Ply May. By 11:20 a.m., a squad ordered to recce a possible approach route from the mountain captured their first prisoner. Under questioning, the soldier said he was a deserter. Hal Moore thought he was a lookout. However, he also revealed that 3 battalions of approximately 1,200 men were positioned on Chupong Mountain, eagerly awaiting their opportunity to kill Americans. By midday, Bravo and Charlie companies had fully arrived, bringing the American strength on the ground to just over 200 men. A recon patrol from Bravo Company ventured northwest of the landing zone, further up the identified approach, encountering scattered enemy riflemen. The first shots of the Battle of Yadrang rang out. Lieutenant Henry Herrick, commanding Bravo Company's 2nd Platoon, decided to pursue the enemy up the mountain. He told his company CO John Heron, who responded, "Well, make sure you don't get surrounded or anything," realizing that 2nd Platoon moving off would expose B Company's right flank. Herrick advanced quickly, but soon found himself and his men in a perilous situation. Meanwhile, by 12:45, Bravo Company's forward elements to the left of Herrick's platoon got locked in a fierce firefight. The situation deteriorated rapidly. By 1:30 p.m, Captain John Heron, Bravo Company CO, reported heavy enemy attacks by at least 2 NVA companies back to the command post. Herrick's 2nd Platoon has now been cut off and surrounded by about 250 NVA who'd been en route to the landing zone, and he was taking heavy fire. Tragically, Herrick was killed in action. Shortly thereafter, Platoon Sergeant Palmer is killed, and after that, Sergeant Paul Hurdle is killed. After that, Sergeant Robert Stokes was killed. The PAVN targeted leaders with precision, those shouting commands, pointing, or talking on radios. It now fell to Buck Sergeant Ernie Savage to take control of the platoon. He got on the radio and called in artillery, organized the men, redistributed casualty ammunition, and in the battle which followed distinguished himself through extraordinary heroism.
They hit us from a couple sides at the same time, it seemed like, and they killed the platoon sergeant and platoon leader. The motor FO got killed. The motor FO guy fell in front of me. I pulled his radio headset under the log, and I started calling artillery in. I called artillery in real close.
What was going through your mind when you realized you were now taking over the platoon?
Nothing. I just looked around to see what had to be done to try to survive. The only thing you could do was just set up your perimeter and pull it in tight, get the ammunition redistributed, and get your artillery restoration set in. That's exactly what I did.
He would be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the United States Army's 2nd highest award for valor. Hal Moore would remark in his after-action report that the effective platoon command provided by Buck Sergeant Savage, whose original role was commanding a rifle squad of about 4 or 5 guys, proved the vital importance of teaching artillery radio and developing command skills and preparing junior leadership ranks to perform higher command duties. The intensity of the battle escalates. Mortar fire from 60 and 81mm rounds targeted the landing zone, while rocket fire and small arms raked Bravo Company's positions. By 2:40 p.m, as Delta Company begins to land, they are met with a hail of bullets. One of Delta's radio operators was killed in a helicopter before he could even dismount, and both the door gunner and pilot were wounded. Enemy fire forced 8 Hueys to abort their landings, leaving the fight critically undermanned. Casualties mount rapidly. They were facing 500 to 600 NVA troops with reinforcements streaming in. Colonel Hal Moore urgently requested reinforcements, a plea that was granted as B Company 2nd Battalion 7th Cavalry began assembling for deployment. By 3 p.m, the NVA temporarily withdrew to regroup, allowing 5 Hueys to land reinforcements, its troops joining the fight under harrowing conditions. Delta Company, under Captain Ray Lefebvre, arrived amidst heavy enemy attacks. Lefebvre and his platoon commander, Lieutenant Roel Tabo Oda, were both seriously wounded shortly after landing. Ray passed command of the company to Platoon Sergeant George Gonzalez, who exhibited exceptional bravery and leadership, which was instrumental in maintaining the defensive perimeter at X-Ray against overwhelming waves of enemies. Meanwhile, Hal Moore commanded Charlie Company, commanded by Captain Bob Edwards, to take up positions to the south and southeast of the landing zone. Hal Moore would later say, "This command was pure instinct. At the time of the command, the heaviest fighting was to the north and northwest. In a fast-moving situation, a leader has to trust his instinct. My instinct told me that we were going to get struck from the south. The bullets were whizzing through the command post, and Hal Moore took cover behind an anthill. Their presence proved critical as the NVA 66th Regiment launched a massive, renewed assault. What began as a tactical air assault had turned into a desperate battle for survival, facing a determined enemy with superior numbers set on overrunning the landing zone. Roughly 250 men of the 1st of the 7th fight to hold their ground. Involved in the battle was former British para Rick Rescorla. Rick was born in 1939 in Hale, Cornwall. Aged 17, he was drafted into the army for his national service and joined the Parachute Regiment. After completing his 2-year national service stint, he re-upped to serve in Cyprus from 1957 to 1960 during the ACOA Cypriot insurgency. Seeking adventure, Rick left the British Army and joined the Northern Rhodesia Police. The Northern Rhodesia Police at the time was a paramilitary organisation which conducted patrols in areas at risk of rebellion and insurgency. Rick immigrated to the United States in 1963. Upon arrival, he promptly enlisted in the US Army, completed basic training and was offered a place in ROTC Officer Candidate School and volunteered for airborne training at Fort Benning, where he was offered a role as platoon commander in the newly formed 7th Air Cavalry Regiment. Rick fought in the Battle of Ia Drang, and Hal Moore describes Rick in his book We Were Soldiers as the best platoon leader I ever saw. Known to his men under the nickname Hardcore,
Great to see all of you. It's like preaching to the choir and telling a war story to this group.
in the heat of battle, he was described as singing soldiers' songs to his men to calm their nerves and keep up morale. His actions during his tour in Vietnam would earn him a Purple Heart, a Silver Star, and a Bronze Star, among other awards. At 3:20 p.m., Moore orders Alpha and Bravo companies to mount another attempt to break through to Bravo Company's cut-off 2nd Platoon. The attack was preceded by precise artillery and aerial rocket artillery (ARA) fire. However, the advance falters 75 meters from its objective. Alpha Company moved up to the left of Bravo Company. The North Vietnamese had dug in, using spider holes, anthills, and dense foliage to launch devastating ambushes. Some enemy soldiers allowed the Americans to pass, opening fire from concealed positions as soon as they were surrounded. Imagine the nerve and discipline allowing soldiers to run past you. It was here that the NVA strategy of targeting American leadership became brutally clear. Alpha Platoon lost all 3 of its platoon leaders in minutes in the intense firefight. All this time, Bruce Crandall kept delivering reinforcements, supplies, and evacuating the wounded. Major Bruce Crandall made 22 flights into landing zone X-ray over the course of the battle, often flying in extremely hazardous conditions under heavy enemy fire, earning his nickname for flying lower than snake shit. For his actions during the Battle of Ia Drang, Crandall was later awarded the Medal of Honor. Had it not been for the helicopter pilots, the battalion would have been wiped out. By 5:40 p.m, Moore made the difficult decision to withdraw Alpha and Bravo companies under covering fire, which means leaving the cut-off platoon to fend for itself, halting the assault and shifting focus to preparing for a coordinated night attack. Meanwhile, the cut-off 2nd Platoon, led by Buck Sergeant Ernie Savage, fights desperately to hold on to their position. They are completely surrounded and vastly outnumbered. They dug in on a 25-meter wide rise, redistributing ammunition under heavy fire. With calm determination, Savage organizes a defensive perimeter, directing danger close artillery fire with pinpoint accuracy and inspired his troops to repel wave after wave of enemy attacks. His actions kept the North Vietnamese at bay through the night. As night fell, reinforcements arrived in the form of Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 2nd of the 7th, led by Captain Myron Diderik. Amidst heavy enemy fire, Moore ordered the wounded evacuated, using a smaller northeastern section of the landing zone to be defended at all costs. Despite the harrowing conditions, artillery harassment fire and defensive preparations allowed the Americans to hold their ground. Also, Joe Galloway, a 23-year-old UPI reporter, flew in. By the end of the first day, 1 in 5 soldiers under Moore's command was dead or wounded. 88 casualties out of 450 men. The isolated platoon endured 3 night attacks. With support from a spooky gunship and relentless artillery strikes, Savage's leadership and the platoon's determination turned the tide, beating back 3 separate 50-man assaults with nothing more than small arms and artillery fire. At 6:30 a.m. on November 15th, the battle reignited. A reconnaissance patrol from Charlie Company triggered another NVA assault as fresh enemy forces crawled through tall grass and launched a ferocious attack. The NVA launched an all-out push, sending 2 to 3 companies against the perimeter. They are now coming from the south and northwest. Charlie Company bore the brunt of the assault, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. By 7:30 a.m., the situation has become dire, with NVA soldiers infiltrating the perimeter and reaching Moore's command post. With the landing zone now in grave danger of being overrun, Hal Moore and Sergeant Major Basil Plumley personally joined the fight, with NVA soldiers breaking through the perimeter and running through the LZ at their command post. By 7:55 a.m. on November 15th, 1965, the situation at Landing Zone X-Ray has reached breaking point. With the perimeter under extreme pressure and the risk of annihilation looming, Hal Moore calls the code word Broken Arrow, a desperate radio signal requesting all available air support across South Vietnam because an American position is about to be overrun. All troops use colored smoke grenades, popping smoke, to mark the defensive positions, signaling air and artillery units to strike perilously close to friendly lines. For 3 relentless hours, the battlefield was engulfed by F-100 Super Sabres, artillery barrages, helicopter gunships, and all these pilots were Korea War veterans. They would fly as low and slow as possible to pinpoint their fire and protect the US troops. One errant napalm strike from an F-100 fell within the landing zone, engulfing 3 men in flames. Hal Moore saw it tumbling towards his command post, burning the 3 Americans, but orders his forward air controller Charlie Hastings to stop the next plane, which was following close behind, to abort, upon which Charlie starts hollering into the radio. The second plane aborts just in time. Charlie looked up shocked, seeing the charged soldiers in front of him, but Hal Moore is reported to have said, "Don't worry about that one, keep them coming." He would later say, "Friendly fire is inevitable in a danger close scenario. We had to keep doing what we were doing." Under relentless assault, Charlie Company suffers heavy casualties, including all 5 of its officers, 2 killed, 3 seriously wounded, but it refuses to break. Everyone, including Hal Moore and Sergeant Major Plumley, are involved in the fight now. Reinforcements begin arriving at 9:10 a.m., brought in waves by helicopters despite the enemy's heavy fire. These fresh troops finally stabilize the line and enable a lateral sweep to clear the battlefield of NVA forces. The sweet stench of death hangs over the battlefield. By 1 p.m., B Company finally reaches the beleaguered 2nd Platoon Bravo Company, the lost platoon. Out of the original 29 men, only 7 remain unscathed. 8 are dead, 12 wounded. Against impossible odds, they've held their position for over 24 hours. The survivors, along with the wounded, are now evacuated to safety by helicopter. As darkness falls, strength is down to 8 officers and 264 men. They use the lull in the fighting to dig deeper foxholes. All the men are ordered to walk out and then back to look at their own positions from the viewpoint of the enemy, and then improve the setup and enhance fields of fire. They were right to do so, because early the next morning they are struck again. At 4 a.m. on November 16th, the North Vietnamese launched their final assault, targeting B Company's 2nd Battalion. Flares illuminate the battlefield as the Americans unleash artillery and small arms fire to repel the enemy. Continuous artillery strikes hammer the NVA positions, breaking their will to fight. By 10 a.m. on the 3rd day, the perimeter is secure. Thanks to the improved perimeter and lessons learned, the Americans suffer only 6 casualties wounded, no KIA, while the enemy loses 200 men at least. In daylight, the Americans perform an attack to pursue the retreating enemy. Hal Moore now begins evacuating his troops, bringing an end to the Battle of Nha Trang at Landing Zone X-Ray. The cost was staggering: 79 dead, 121 wounded, and critical losses among leadership and radio men. But the toll on the North Vietnamese was even greater: 634 confirmed dead and over 1,200 estimated wounded. On September 11th, 2001, aged 62, Rick arrived at 8 a.m. in the morning at his office in the World Trade Center, South Tower, where he worked as head of security for Morgan Stanley Bank, which had 1,700 employees in the South Tower over 22 floors. Rick had extensively trained evacuation procedures for the employees, and when he saw a plane hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m, immediately ordered a full evacuation. A port authority announcement sounded throughout the building, urging people to stay at their desks, but Rick insisted on a full evacuation, telling his former brother-in-arms, now colleague, Dan Hill, "The dumb sons of bitches told me not to evacuate, but I'm getting my people out of here." He directed people down the stairs, telling them to avoid the lifts. When the second plane hit the South Tower, he was seen standing in the stairwell on the 44th floor, singing Cornish songs to calm people's nerves as they filed out of the burning building. 2,700 employees, only 12 were left inside when Rick was last seen re-entering the building, ignoring instructions to evacuate himself. "I need to make sure everyone is out." He was last seen walking up the stairs not long before the building collapsed, killing 13 of Morgan Stanley's 2,700 employees, which included Rick, his 2 brave deputies Wesley Mercer, Jorge Velasquez, and security guard Godwin Ford, who had collectively chosen to support the evacuation efforts until the very end. In 2019, Rick was posthumously awarded the Presidential Citations Medal. He is also immortalized with a statue at Fort Moore, Georgia, previously known as Fort Benning. It's where he completed his airborne training, renamed in honor of Hal Moore as Fort Moore. The statue serves as a tribute to Rick's bravery and leadership, both in military service and during the 9/11 attacks. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and join our Facebook group community, link in the description.